Many of you that know me through either YouTube or in real life know that I've had quite the extensive amount of automobiles for only being 22. This one is number 13. Today I want to go over and share all the cars I've had in my 6 years of driving and almost 8 years on YouTube. Let's get into it. Right off the bat, for longtime friends that have been following the channel, I guess the cat is out of the bag. But as of now, this car is redacted, so we don't know anything about it yet. Today, I'm not only going to be talking about all the cars that I've owned, but I've also wanted to share some honorable mentions, the good ones, the bad ones, everything. To make it easier for myself so I don't forget things, I'm going to be using my handy dandy notes app, but we can first start off with Betty White, my 2007 Honda Accord EXL V6 in taffeta white pearl. It was the automatic version, but it was a really fun car. I'm very nostalgic for the 7th gen Accord. Even as a kid I liked them, and I really liked it as I owned mine. I would have still kept this car if it was the manual version, the V6 manual. I actually reviewed one of them. It was a really fun to drive car. There's just something about that J Series V6. It made about 240 horsepower and 212 pound-feet of torque. Now, at the same time that I had my Accord, I was in the mood for a project vehicle, something a little older, something manual, and I had recently tried to acquire an abandoned vehicle in my neighborhood that I actually got in contact with the owner, but that fell through. That vehicle will be an honorable mention. So since that car fell through, I then decided to look at Facebook Marketplace, and thankfully I found this really close to me, my 1997 Toyota Tacoma 5-speed V6, also known as Phantom. This was the longest I have ever kept a vehicle. I recently sold him this past summer, but I bought the truck and I really was trying to get it running before I graduated. It really was in rough shape when I picked it up. It needed a clutch, suspension, all kinds of things, but after my dad and I took it to the shop, it really paid itself off by being a steadfast, reliable, strong little pickup truck. I took that thing off-roading. I went everywhere with that thing. I still really like the 1st gen Tacoma. I was just ready to move on from the platform because I dealt with years of rust issues and fixing the rust issues. In some spots that the frame would get stronger, other parts, like in the middle of the frame, just completely crumbled. So I decided to sell the truck recently, and it turns out I saw it on Facebook Marketplace a day after I sold it with the frame pieces just shittily patched on. So that thing is definitely gonna crumble. And I sold it for parts. We then move on to Shadow, my 2005 Volvo S60R. I really miss this car. It's something that I'm still fond of today, and it's the car that really began my love for Volvo. Mine in particular was manual, which really made me fall in love with it. Unfortunately, mine was a rebuilt title, and it wasn't really taken care of in its recent years. It had a lot of underlying issues that just made it a pain to maintain, but I still would really love to own one of these today, just in a lot better shape, because the powertrain is like nothing else. Volvo 5-cylinders sound phenomenal. After the S60R, I stayed with my Volvo roots, but I still had the Tacoma at this point, and I got Casper, another car that I really love, my 2013 Volvo S60 T6R design in ice white. It really felt like an adult purchase to me because it was the first car I've ever financed and the only car that I've ever financed. But the driving experience once again was great. These used a 3-liter turbocharged inline-6. I still really believe that the 6-cylinder Volvos like the S60, the XC70, and the XC60, those are the last real Volvos, because everything with the 4 cylinders and hybridization and electrification, those aren't real Volvos to me. But that S60 is really a car that I would kind of say I regret selling in a way. But at the time, in about 2020, 2021, I decided to do YouTube full time and I didn't want to have a car payment, so it was the smart decision. I sold it for, thankfully, about what I paid for it, even after putting 30,000 miles on it. I really drove that car. I know the timeline is a little bit jumbled up, but it's not a huge deal. I acquired one of my first junkers ever, my free 2000 Toyota Camry that I got from one of my dad's good friends. He had it since new, but when I had it, it had almost 300,000 miles. It was beyond clapped. It was 50 shades of beige. I ended up painting it with Rust-Oleum cranberry red, hence the name Miss Cranberry for this car. I never really drove it because literally every aspect of this car was messed up. The brakes, well, the engine did run, but it leaked all the oil that was in it. Everything was messed up with this car. So I ended up selling it for about 500 bucks, made 400 bucks profit, so I guess you could say it was one of my first flips. At the time, and I still could say this, I'd love to get a 4th gen V8 Limited 4Runner in the later years, but if anyone knows how the market is on those, they're almost $20,000 now. So I was looking for an alternative, and I was actually originally going to buy a Volvo XC70 because I still wanted to stay in my Volvo roots, but I ended up finding Thor, my 2010 Volvo XC90 V8. I actually found Thor through a friend of a friend, thanks to Ian and Quinn, and I really got him for a heck of a deal, especially considering XC90 V8 prices now. But I can easily say the XC90 V8 is one of my all-time favorite cars, dare I say one of my dream cars, even as a child. So when I had the opportunity to buy one, I really did jump on it. Clearly I'm with one right now, so I guess that means something about how much I like them, but I unfortunately bought this car for the wrong reasons at the time because I wanted a 4Runner, like I said. I wanted an overlanding SUV, but since I got the XC90, I was like, oh, maybe I can build the XC90 to be like a 4Runner. And I tried to do that by putting bigger tires on and lifting it. And it did increase the capability of the XC90, but the XC90 itself is not a 4Runner. And even if you try to make it one, it really won't be. I know that now, but I wanted to learn back then, and I did. It was pretty cool though. At one point I did have the S60, the Tacoma, and also the XC90, so I had a little bit of a fleet. But I ended up selling the XC90 after a few months of being like, I don't like how they are after lifting them and putting tires on them. So about fall of 2021, I sold the XC90 for double of what I paid for it, and then I ended up buying Selena, my 2001 Lexus GS 430. I have a few videos out on the channel about this car. I've always been nostalgic for the 2nd generation GS. They are still really nice cars, but I would definitely recommend to find one that's in a lot better shape than the one I had. I bought the car in Akron, Ohio, and I was actually catfished when I bought it because the advertised pictures of that car on Facebook Marketplace and also on Craigslist were from 4 years before I actually bought the car. The car looked completely different. The paint was bad. It had check engine light for a bunch of things. It was quite the catfish, but it was a learning experience. I ended up keeping that car for, I think, a year and a half. I really like the GS 430. The engine is great. I just really hated the throttle response. Those 430s have dull throttle response, but they handle well. They're very comfortable. They're not that techy, but they offer a lot of comfort and creature comforts, so I can still recommend them. Now, because of the awful paint job on the GS, I ended up painting it, and I wanted to experiment because prior I painted Miss Cranberry and I painted my Tacoma Phantom from white to Voodoo Blue, which was actually Rust-Oleum Brilliant Blue. But the paint job on the GS was my first ever glitter paint job, so it didn't exactly turn out how I wanted it to, but the car still did look better. I once again had another free car join my life, and this one was one that I actually liked and wanted to keep. Kermit, my 1998 Toyota RAV4 with the 5-speed manual. I got this car for free from my uncle, and it was actually pretty interesting. It was a one-owner car. it did have a lot of miles on it, almost 200,000 miles on it, but it was actually from Canada, so the gauges were in kilometers and everything in the car had French on it. And the reason I got it for free was because it was unfortunately in a rear-end accident, so the car was really totaled. I did want to fix it. I wanted to tie it to a tree and take off with it, but unfortunately the drivetrain was really compromised, I'm assuming from the accident, because the clutch was shot and also the transmission. I thankfully ended up selling the RAV4, but I still was yearning for an SUV. I love having an SUV. And I've always looked up to the Passport and the Rodeo because I've been nostalgic to them. So I kind of had to, well, not had to, but I had to jump on the opportunity because I found this one for $1,000. I bought it from the hood. It was in pretty rough shape, pretty disgusting looking, but after a few days of cleaning the interior and cleaning the paint, it actually turned out to being a pretty clean example of one. I was just quick to find out that they're all kind of junk. The suspension on all of them creaks and rattles. Everything about them feels very tinny. It really felt like a tin can when you're driving it. So I was glad to sell that, but I did enjoy driving it, just slowly. On the highway it was really terrifying, and I can really say that that Passport put a little bit of fear in me when it came to driving. So I ended up selling the Passport after doing a little bit to it. Thankfully it didn't cost me much money, but I ended up selling it for more than what I paid for it, so that was to me my first actual flip, because it was a nice vehicle when I sold it. But I ended up buying my partner Michael's 2001 Infiniti QX4, also known as Cliff. So I bought it from him at a discounted price, and I kind of do like the R50 Pathfinders. I still respect them. I just wish that we had our hands on a more clean example of one, because the one we had about 250,000 miles on it, and you could tell the engine and transmission did run and work pretty well, but other than that, it was a real junker. But it was another vehicle that we got for about $1,000, so you can't really complain when you get something that cheap. But I can still recommend the R50 Pathfinder. So now it's about early 2022. At this point, I had the Tacoma, I had the GS, and I had the QX4. So I did get tired of the GS, mostly because it was automatic, but also that car itself had a lot of underlying issues. Like if the tank was full, it would just leak gas everywhere and it would randomly cut out. So I was ready to get rid of that car. So I posted the thing on Facebook Marketplace, and it sat for over a month with no one buying it, but someone, by the grace of the universe, messaged me with a 1990 Mazda Miata, and now I named this car Peep, but the name never really stuck. I decided to trade the GS for the Miata mostly because I saw the Miata as something that would be way easier to sell than a rattle-canned Lexus GS. The Miata did need a lot of body work. It was in pretty rough shape, but I gave the NA Miata a chance, but I'm glad that I got rid of that car too. The NA Miatas are very charming, but they're slow. They really feel like tin cans on the road, but they do handle well and they drive like go-karts. So I do see the appeal, but I really didn't fall in love with that car or really get attached to it. So I really just let it sit in my garage. So at this point, I was pretty automotively displeased. I had the Tacoma that was giving me a lot of rust issues. I had the QX4 that was a junker, and I had the Miata that just sat in the garage. So I actually decided to sell everything. The first car to go was actually the Miata. Someone about an hour away bought the thing to drift it. The second one to go was the Tacoma. Like I said, someone in Baltimore actually bought it and botched the frame up, but I know that thing cannot be running and driving right now. So I had the QX4 left, and that thing also sat on Facebook Marketplace and got no bites. People test drove it, and it was a nice driving thing if you needed a beater, but no one wanted it. So that's when I decided to go back to my Volvo roots once again and try to find another XC90. And this is where I guess I can talk about the first scam that I encountered. I posted on the Swedespeed forums, one of the Volvo forums that I thought would be pretty safe, and 2 days later someone actually responded to me and gave me an email address of one of his buddies that had it for sale, because it was maybe 2 months after the search on my own I decided to ask for help, because these, especially in the trim that you want to find, they can be really hard. But long story short, I put a deposit down for a car that did not exist. So that kind of scarred me from getting another XC90 or looking at Volvos for a while. So I ended up finding Klaus, my 2004 Mercedes-Benz E500 wagon. This was another one of my favorite cars ever, my first Mercedes ever, but I would not own one again. The ownership experience was quite troublesome, but the driving experience is really what pays it off. It had air suspension, which is what made me really have a, I would say, disdain for that car, because one strut was $1,000. But I won't really get into that car too much because talking about it kind of is frustrating, but I ended up selling it on Cars and Bids because I was tired of it. It really drove nice when it worked, but that was half of the time that I owned it. Half of the time it was just sitting in my garage broken. So I finally decided that it was time to actually wait and find something that I wanted. So I sold that, and now we're here sitting on this redacted automobile that has yet to be revealed to the channel, but I've bought another XC90, and this one is one that I'm actually pretty happy with. But we'll talk about that more in a whole other video that I want to dedicate to this one. But that's all the cars that I've owned, at least as of right now. Now I'm kind of not hiding any cars from you. I'm not. No, I had to double check, but before I start sweating and melting, I will let you guys go. Thank you all for watching this video and also supporting all the rest of the videos. Thank you to my friend Paul for letting me use his camera while my camera, while I don't have a camera. That's a whole other debacle, but enough rambling. Thank you all for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, peeps.